Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast, sponsored by the IBCA. We are a global podcast that shares the passion for the coaching profession. You will hear the stories of coaches from all around the world. We are covering the profession in game, outside of the game, and anything in between. As always, thank you for listening. We look forward to sharing the coaches' stories with you.
All right, on this episode of the After Timeout podcast, we have the head coach of Fairfield University, Carly Thibault-Dudonis. Coach, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me. It's a beautiful weekend here in Connecticut and excited to talk some hoops.
So we like to start every episode with what we call the opening tip, just to have our listeners kind of hear your journey, your story, and kind of how you got to where you are, and tell us a little bit about your program so you can promote your young ladies and what you guys are doing.
Awesome. I don't know. Do you want me to dive right in?
Yeah, go right in. Go ahead.
So I've, been around the game as long as I've been alive, really, with my dad being a coach. Grew up kind of with whatever team he was coaching being our, relatives, if you will, because we were always moving and on the move. But really kind of got my start in women's basketball when my dad took over as the WNBA head coach of the Connecticut Sun. And that was in 2003. Hard to believe, over 20 years ago now. But that was, I was close to high school, and that was the first time I'd seen female professional athletes, female coaches, and kind of changed my brain to think basketball and think about that as a long-term, passion. And, I've never looked back. Played college basketball at Monmouth in New Jersey, coached at several different universities, got my start at Florida State as director of recruiting, and coached at Eastern Michigan, Mississippi State, Minnesota, and now the head coach at Fairfield. And so had the opportunity to see a lot of different aspects of the games, a lot of different ways it can be done, ways it can be coached, and met some amazing people along the way.
So we don't have this very often where somebody's dad was a head coach, their brother was a head coach, their husband is their assistant. So I'm going to kind of break this down a little bit. But maybe let's start with, what are some of the great things you get from these bonds? That's so unique, to have your dad that was in coaching, your husband in coaching, your brother in coaching. So I guess what are some of the great things, and maybe how does your mom put up with all of that?
I have a built-in support system in so many ways, whether it's, bouncing ideas off my brother for how to work on a particular skill, whether it's calling my dad on ways to handle running a program, whether it's my husband daily of, his ideas and his perspective, his, ability in real time to give me feedback that I know is going to be honest and direct. But I also know that all these people have my best interest at heart, which, a lot of people say is hard to find in this game. And so I've got this just built-in incredible, brain trust, if you will, that know me well as well and know how I operate and what will work for me. But I just constantly have people that can give me ideas and feedback and can see the game at a really high level. And so, yeah, my mom does put up with us. That's a good way to put it. She constantly is surrounded by basketball talk, which she was an athlete, as well. But I think, she has her limits. So when we start to get into nitty gritty of plays or drills or actions or whatever, she kind of goes into her own world, whether it's on her phone or whatever, because she just has had enough at some point. But she keeps us all in line.
So just as a counter to that, then maybe, is it ever hard to kind of get away from the game a little bit mentally with just so much basketball around? Like if I go, hang out with some family, none of the rest of them are coaches. So obviously it's usually talking about something else. Do you ever have trouble just getting away from it?
To be honest, I don't really want to. I haven't felt the need to, I guess. There's times where, maybe at the end of a long week or whatever, I'll put on a mindless show to kind of change my brain at all a little bit and give myself a little bit of a break. But I enjoy talking the game. I enjoy, it is the basketball is life. I'm sure everyone's watched Ted Lasso, like football is life. Like that's how I feel basketball is. And I enjoy it. And, we have our moments where we do get away, or my husband and I will go out to dinner, and we're still going to talk our team. And so that still comes up. And it doesn't get old.
So besides your great coaches in your family, you've worked for a lot of great coaches as well. Um, I guess like as you're coming up and you're making your way, what are some of the biggest things you took away from those coaches, right? And then even though you were surrounded by so much basketball and so much experience, what was something you didn't know when you became a head coach that you had to learn despite all those people mentoring you?
I know I've been so fortunate. I've learned from just some of the giants in the game. I'll start with Sue Semrau at Florida State. I mean, I'm so thankful that she was my, very first experience in working in college basketball, because she is so people centered. She does it for the right reasons. She really embraces and is about the women's, the student athlete experience and empowering young women. And so I forever take that away from me, not only for our student athletes, but she also made her staff feel very valued. I mean, I was like the lowest of the low on the totem pole and on that staff, and she made me feel seen and important and valued in what I did. So that's always stuck with me. And she's always one of my first phone calls if I've got something going on, or have just need to hear somebody's side of things. From Tory Verdi, he was my first, that was my first assistant coaching job. And he was so meticulously prepared for every game. And so just from a scouting perspective, a details perspective, I really learned how to prepare for an opponent, and how to really kind of out coach in a way of as far as your preparation and your scouting. And then I really carried that on when I went to work for Coach Schaefer, who very similar in his meticulousness in scouting. But I also took so much from Coach Schaefer in having an identity of how you play, and recruiting to that identity, and taking the time and practice to really live that. You're gonna get what you emphasize, and we spent a lot of time on defense. And I don't think he probably gets as much credit as he deserves as an offensive coach. But his ability to form habits defensively, something that we use every single day at Fairfield, and how we practice plan and make sure that our habits are what they need to be, particularly on the defensive end. But just his ability to create that identity, and recruit, and be really intentional to recruit towards that. And then I'm so thankful I worked for Lindsay at Minnesota. She's someone that I've known for those early WNBA years, since 2004. And she's someone that just from a staff perspective valued the people in the room, and gave us a voice, and allowed us to critically think, and work together, and kind of build that chemistry and camaraderie as a staff. And so I always joke I would have been a terrible head coach had I not worked for Lindsay, because she really showed the importance of your staff feeling important, and I hope that I do that for my staff every day because of that.
So that's an interesting, if I could just quick follow up, that's an interesting idea of making your staff feel important. What are some of the ways that coaches can make their staffs feel important?
I think first and foremost, kind of know what their goals are. And I'll give a quick example. Erica Brown on my staff, she's unbelievable. I'm going to try to hang on to her as long as I can, but she wants to be a head coach one day. And so trying to give her, and knowing that in the way that I operate, and trying to give her responsibility that will allow her to get out of her comfort zone and continue to have reps to be ready to be a head coach someday. Knowing their goals, and then knowing what their strengths are, and giving them autonomy to coach and have a voice and ask their opinion. We meet every day before practice, and I truly do want feedback and opinions. I think if there's something to be said for being a head coach that knows exactly how you want things done, but you hired people on your staff for a reason, and so getting their feedback, valuing their feedback. You may not use every single thing that you get, but there is a space in the room for everybody to have a voice. And I think that's really important. And, we have great basketball minds on our staff, and you should hire great basketball minds so that you do take feedback and input.
Okay, so you kind of start at Fairfield, you take over as the head coach, and you begin to lay the foundation. When you went into it, did you kind of have an idea of what you wanted to accomplish in, let's say, I'm just making up numbers here, like the first 30 days, the first 60 days, the first 6 months, the first year, etc. Did you have like things you wanted to get done to lay that foundation? And along the way, did you kind of develop some things you wanted to do to lay like your mark on the program?
So I think the first 30 days, so much of it is building a relationship with your current team. It's with the transfer portal, it's really easy to be like, okay, we got to recruit all these kids. But I think I took a little bit of a different approach and just lean into the team that we had. And you hear differing thoughts, but like those are our kids. Whether we recruited them or not, they didn't sign to play for me. But I wanted them to again feel valued and feel like they were really important in what we were trying to do, a really big step. So I spent a lot of time with that team. I did one-on-one workouts with all of them when I first took the job for I think we had like 8 days or something we could do workouts before the end of the spring semester. And then hiring the staff, those were kind of the two most important things immediately, was getting good people on board, which I feel like I have the best staff in the country. And Eric Johnson, I mentioned Erica Brown, my husband's on staff, and it was Alex McKinnon, our director of basketball operations. We didn't have a GA at the time. So getting those people that had really similar values to me, and we're great teachers of the game, wanted to pour into our student athletes. And so I feel like I hit the jackpot there. And then from there, taking all of that and kind of building what our standards and our values were going to be, because that's kind of, you talk about the foundation, that's really where it starts for me, of how are you going to operate day in and day out. We had an idea of how we wanted to play, and kind of started to dive into that and realized we needed to kind of pivot and adjust based on what that team was built to be good at, and kind of finding a happy medium. Before, obviously, we played a lot of 5-out this year and shot a bunch of threes, but that team wasn't built to do that. That team had won a championship playing slower and playing zone, and was really successful at that. So we kind of had to find a happy medium there. But that foundation, I think, was really important for what we've been able to do. And built, our culture was built that year. And so I think just we kind of chipped away at, you talked about like, 3 months, 6 months as we went into that season of just trying to find a style that still allowed us to keep progressing towards how we wanted to play, but also meet that team, allow that team to be successful and meet them where they were at.
So let's talk about your defense a little bit. We actually did a breakdown before your Indiana game of some of the stats for our followers. You had, I think, the 10th rated defense in the NCAA this season. So I guess let's start with like, how do you go about communicating what the identity is going to be, right? Like, I think it starts there, like, hey, this is what we're going to do with your players. And then what are you kind of doing every day, whether it's workouts, practice, film, to enhance the identity and point out the things that you're looking to do, but at the same time, kind of correcting the mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned obviously this year we were highly ranked in a lot of defensive categories, but that did start our first year. We weren't a prolific offensive team, but we were a really good defensive team, and we kind of set those standards on things we could control that first year. So our kind of, you talk about identity, our three things we talk about defensively is no middle, no paint, no rhythm threes. And no paint probably trumps no middle. And so there were certain times we would tweak as far as, if there was somebody that was very right hand or left hand dominant, we would adjust to keep them from getting in the paint ultimately. But that we felt like we try to force tough twos. We try to avoid taking tough twos on offense, and we try to force people into tough twos, whether it's a tough mid-range jumper in the paint over, multiple high hands without fouling. And we coached that. So I mentioned Coach Schaefer earlier. He is someone that I stole the kind of the turn and run footwork defensively. And so we don't slide. And that's something that he always taught, is that you turn and run. Again, if I'm going to, play or run a sprint against you or run a race against you, I'm not going to slide it. I'm going to run it. And so we've kind of taken that, and we do those fundamentals and those footwork drills every single day to just make that. I mean, closeouts are you do that a million times a game. And so you got to be really good at them. So we do some type of turn and run footwork every day. We do closeouts in the half court. whether it's 2-on-2, 3-on-3, every single day. And then we always do some version of a 4-on-4 shell drill. And we have some kind of fundamentals and some basics we do within that. But we have variations based on if it's an opponent coming up, if there's a certain action we want to teach that day. Maybe it's early in October and we're teaching, back screen defense or down screen defense. And so there's some repetitive actions so you can get a bunch of different reps in the course of maybe a 10-minute drill. So those are kind of our basic fundamentals in that. But we are big on, keeping people out of the paint. And then, knowing shooters, not allowing rhythm threes where people can get it off comfortably. And then I think the other thing that ties well into our defense is our transition defense concepts, where we have two really good on-ball defenders, where we call them our hounds. One of them is always picking up the ball in transition, and then we always have a safety, and those are kind of designated Erica on my staff, every substitution, every timeout is communicating who's hound and who's safety. And so that kind of filters into your half court defense. But I think those kind of basic fundamentals have allowed us to be pretty successful.
So, for our listeners, if you go watch film, I will tell you that that identity, you can see it perfectly clear when I was kind of watching you guys, and you can totally see it. But let's before we get to halftime adjustments, let's talk about closeout.
The only thing I would add to that,
Yeah.
defensive thing that I didn't mention is this year we went to switching everything, with the exception of one of our guards who's really good at getting through screens, and that allowed a lot of I won't say variability, versatility probably within our lineups, and be able to play a lot of different people in different combinations. And I think that was a huge key for us as well this year.
And then you hadn't done that before. Was that something you thought you could do, and you just had the personnel to do it?
Yep, it's something that I've always thought it was really hard to play against. When we were in the Big Ten, Maryland was really good at it, and it was really hard to prepare for. You can, in theory, try and slip and do that, but you have to also have players that can go against an aggressive switch, hit the slip on a dime. With there being backside help, it's easier said than done. And we had like I said, we did have some of the personnel to do it because we had a lot of versatility. We were going to be playing a lot of different combinations, and I think it just allowed us to simplify it a lot. Based on who you're playing with, it just was all the same.
So with those closeouts, because right, you could talk to any number of coaches and you can come up with a different way to do it. And I always think it's interesting to find out, obviously no paint, no middle, right? So that's going to dictate some of how you close out. But just kind of what are your main teaching points on those closeouts? Because I know there's a lot of teams that play the same way as you, right? No middle, try to force to the side, whatever it may be.
Yep. So we've kind of gone away from, when we say no middle, we don't necessarily want to angle you baseline though. And that's
Right.
a little bit tricky, that you don't want to just give a straight line drive to the paint. And so we've gone away from, maybe opening up a back foot or being parallel to the sideline. We want you a little bit more squared up when you close out, but we do want you, we call it like top foot above. So your whatever foot is closest to the half court line should be above their top foot, so that you're just they have to go through your chest to get to the nail or get to the elbow. It just kind of angles, the angle of that is a little bit different. Hand above the ball to prevent a rise up rhythm three. And then when they do put the ball on the floor, we basically, it's turn and run. You go hip to hip, and you go and you sprint until you get your nose on the ball and cut it off and make them change directions.
Like that. So let's, before we get to developing relationships here, we call this halftime adjustments. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk with you, since your family is great coaches and you work for so many great coaches, like your filter, right? You have so many great ideas, right? Coming just from your Thanksgiving dinner, right? Or whatever it may be. But how did you kind of go about filtering all that information, right? Especially as you've gone along. I mean, you can find anything you want, right? You can open up Twitter and see all kinds of great stuff, but how did you filter it down to get to where, like, kind of your identity as a coach, right? And what you wanted to do?
I think it's taken a lot of time. And I think that's one of the reasons I took my time becoming a head coach, because I don't think I knew exactly how I wanted to play early on. I've been around a variety of coaching styles, and I think that allowed me to figure out in time, what I liked and what I didn't like. But I think I really started to form it a little bit when I was at Minnesota. I personally played mid-major. I played at Monmouth. I love the mid-major game. I think that's a really great fit for me as a head coach. And we played against teams like Drake and South Dakota State and kind of those powerhouse mid-majors that, in studying them in the last few years, they all play some variation of 5-out where all their players can score in a variety of ways. And so I wanted to go and kind of build that mid-major powerhouse that I think we can eventually win games in the tournament. And that's our goal immediately, to be honest. And so how do you do that? We studied those teams like the ones I mentioned, Florida Gulf Coast, Creighton. You can throw a lot of those kind of powerhouse mid-majors and kind of see what they did, but make it our own. And one thing, I was a shooter. I love shooters. I think that's the way, everyone talks about that's the way the game is going. And so that allows me to recruit and coach. I love coaching shooters. And so you talk about identity and being authentic. I think that flows naturally for us to recruit players who can shoot the ball. And if you can't, that's fine, but you have to be elite at something else. And so you'll hear our staff talk about in recruiting a lot, well, what is she elite at then if she can't shoot? So I think that's kind of evolved as I've gone along of like what my identity is going to look like. But I love the ball movement. The selflessness is core to me as a human at a very individual and fundamental level, as I love selflessness, togetherness. And I think that 5-out and that ball movement really, feeds into that.
So just to kind of follow on that, then, like, do you also feel like you said, you went to switching this year, right? That was a little bit different for you guys, has given you some, I guess, versatility, right? Based on you being in these different systems and seeing different things to be like, okay, we can stay within our principles, but make a subtle tweak and you feeling comfortable with it, right? Because sometimes there's a tweak, but you're not super comfortable with it. So you have to have an assistant or whatever. So you feel like that's helped you along the way as well?
I did. Well, I loved it because I think we have individuals on our team who can be really aggressive. I think the switching allowed us to actually be more aggressive because we almost hedge switch as much as we can. So it allowed us to keep the ball out of the middle. If the ball's on the wing, we do hedge switch. We're aggressive. We try to kind of turn them back. But again, it is fundamental as far as authentic to me because I love, like we talked about, the versatility. We have lineups this year where we could have played 5 guards together. We could have played 3 of our, road runner post players together. And so rather than have the confusion of, okay, we've got a guard playing the 4, if you will, or the 5, like, what are we doing on that versus if it's a post play? So I was like, let's just simplify. And I love that it while we have to practice it a lot, it's not I thought we were in this, I thought we were in an ice, I thought we were in a down, I thought whatever it was. It's very simple, and those habits can be really, really tight, if you will, because it's the same thing every single time, and the expectation is the same every time. So it allows kind of some black and white in that, an ability to coach that. But it allows us to, like I said, for me, have a lot of freedom offensively to play whoever I want to and whoever the best 5 are at that time.
So as we go into the second half of the episode, this is kind of a unique topic. We have not really touched on this extensively with one coach, but with you, we kind of want to talk about developing relationships with players and some stakeholder groups. And you had kind of touched on it, but for the second half of the episode, for our listeners, we're going to really dig in. So the first piece of it is developing relationships with recruits. As Todd and I like to say, we like to do our homework on our guests, and whether it was Florida State or Mississippi State or wherever, Minnesota, wherever you had been, you played a major part in recruiting and a major part in bringing in probably that school's best class at that point. So for you, how do you start that development with rapport with recruits that don't necessarily know you? You don't necessarily know them at first.
I think, it starts, especially as an assistant, with knowing what that head coach needs, wants, what type of identity they want to recruit towards, what type of player they want to coach. And I think I made some mistakes along the way of, who I thought that person would want. And you have to know your head coach's identity really well to be able to do that well. But I think, and I learned a lot from Coach Sue early on of recruiting everyone around the prospective student athlete as much as you recruit them. And Sue was phenomenal at that. She would recruit the mom, the dad, the grandma, the sibling, the high school coach, AAU coach, the principal. I mean, she talked to everybody. And I think that's a really subtle way and some subliminal messaging is anytime that person talked to anyone in their circle, they would mention Florida State. And so kind of recruiting that person's inner circle. And then from others, I learned, go make sure you have whoever they're helping is helping them make that decision. Make sure you're talking to them as much as you're talking to the recruit as well. But then I think now there's so many ways to these kids don't really respond to text messages like they used to. If you look at any one of their phones, they've got like 1,000 unread text messages. So what are they going to answer to? Is it going to be a Snapchat? Is it going to be FaceTime? Figuring out what that mode of communication is going to be. And then I think once you are on the phone with them, like being authentic and being real, and it doesn't need to be check the box on your recruiting call of making sure you're talking about visits, and like you have to just get to know them and spend time and ask genuine, authentic questions, start to figure out what makes them tick. And so it's kind of all these things that lead up to now, once you are on the phone with them and knowing shouldn't be on the phone with them for an hour because they've got a million other calls to make. You don't want them to dread being on the phone with you. But also getting down to who they are, again, as a human and what their goals are.
She's got me thinking, Todd, about them not responding to text messages now. We both kind of shook our head.
Except when it's like they're what they want for dinner, right? On a road trip, then you'll get no mayo, no this, no that, right?
Oh, it's baffling though. When I look at their phones, I'm like, you have so many, that would give me so much anxiety of all these unread messages.
Right.
I'm like,
The second part is just, we have so many high school coaches that listen, 1,000 high school coaches that listen. What are some things maybe a high school coach can do to kind of bring in kids to their own program, kind of recruit maybe their own school, their own freshmen, their own 8th graders coming in?
well, and depending on the situation, if you can recruit, I mean, again, going back to your identity and knowing what's going to fit you. But I think so much of it is developing the youth level. If you have a youth program, if you have a middle school program of being involved and seen in that, so that it is a bit of a feeder, if you will, as far as what your fundamentals are. But I think just, again, being really transparent and clear of who you are as a coach, knowing that, hopefully you exude a personality that they know that you care about them as humans. Again, I don't think it matters how old they are or what level. All these young women just want to know that they're going to be cared for and valued and seen. And again, if they love the game, then they want to be developed. And can you develop them, and can you help them be the best version of themselves on and off the court? And how can you express that?
So now let's just get more on the day-to-day basis, right? You have your star players, you have maybe somebody who's developing, maybe somebody who's redshirt, a freshman that's come in, right? And you now have the transfer portal, which has changed things a lot, right? You're constantly working on those relationships. Not that you weren't before, but right, it's just become more, I guess, upfront, right? With off season, during the season, postseason, all that stuff. So what are you kind of doing on like a daily basis with your players just to kind of reinforce that connection, kind of get a temperature of where they're feeling, on a day-to-day basis?
I've said this a couple times in some interviews, postseason and things like that. I think we overcomplicate it sometimes in the kind of building relationships aspect, where you hear coaches, and it works for some people. Like, I have weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings, and we have 10 minutes, and they have Google Forms that they can tell me if they want to meet. Whereas I kind of go the exact opposite direction, where it's just daily communication and daily touch points and contacts and connections. So it can be as simple as I try to be in the gym every day of practice or workouts 30 minutes before, and however long I need to afterwards. Whether it's someone's coming in and shooting and just kind of wants to talk, whether it's someone's on, stretching on the side or watching, I just get a chance to have, get a connection, get a pulse of where they're at every day. And then I might be, shooting with somebody on one of the baskets, but anytime anybody walks in the gym, I acknowledge, and I use their name, hey, so-and-so, and when they come in the gym, and just make them feel like they're valued, that they're there. And so that, in addition to just being in tune, if they have a tough practice that you can tell they're having a tough day, of just kind of those check-ins afterwards, whether it's a quick text or a FaceTime. Again, for them to know that what they're doing matters. And then in the off season, it's a balance. I try really, I mean, my student athletes know I try to give them time away too. I mean, it's a long season. We're together for a lot of time, whether, from June to April, really. So I try to give them some time. May in particular, where I'll check in here and there, but try not to bombard, because they need time with their families. They need time away from basketball. But still knowing that, I'll check in here and there, and that I'm still thinking of them.
I do think that's a tough balance. And I think about that with my own high school program of like in the off season, yes, you want to check in with them, but yes, you also want to give them space, because it's the same thing, for us, it's 4 or 5 months where you're intensely together every day. So
Yep.
I do think it's a tough balance to find that. So take us through the differences in developing relationships as an assistant and a head coach. I think back to when I was assistant versus now, maybe advice to young head coaches as they move over that chair to still be able to take time to maintain those relationships. Because I don't know about you, when I was an assistant, I felt it was so much easier.
Mhm.
But maybe some advice to coaches now as you become a head coach to keep those relationships develop.
I think that there's this like misnomer that we have to be different, or we have to now, draw a harder line. We're making decisions on playing time and things like that, where I've gone the opposite, where I've tried to be exactly the same. And I actually had to like actively fight that in my first year, where we would, when we had extra hours in the week, we'd be like, okay, you can grab a coach and get extra shots up. Or once we got to our 20 hours of our regular season, grab a coach before, grab a coach after. And I realized our players weren't grabbing me. And I was like, that's weird. And then they were like, head coaches don't do that. So I actively was like, nope, I'm here. I would show up in the gym, just be there for somebody who wanted to shoot. And if I noticed somebody had a rough couple of days of shooting, I'd text them like, hey, let's get in the gym for 20 minutes tomorrow, and just kind of make that a habit. I had to actively go out of my way to make sure that they knew that they could treat me the same as an assistant coach or their position coach. But that was important to me. Again, that was a huge piece in me being able to build relationships, was being a part of their development and a part of them becoming their best self. And so you have to kind of go out of your way to do the things that would be natural for a player to ask a position coach or an assistant coach.
I think what you said too about just texting player, hey, you want to get a workout in? I think that's one of the things I learned when I went from high school to even D3 is right. Like just say, hey, come on, I'm coming in to work with you. Because sometimes I don't think they think like, oh, we're working in practice, we're doing this, but that you're available all the time. So I think that's a great little just tip right there.
Yeah. And I think that I will add this too. I think it's helped me a lot. And being a head coach, a lot of times you do have to be the bad guy, and you are the one making decisions, like I said, playing time and important things for them. But I think my staff, I go back to how good my staff is we have a really good balance where I'm also not always the bad guy. They're great at holding our women accountable when need be. If I don't see it, if I'm not there, sometimes they jump in before I can in practice. So we have a healthy balance of kind of that good cop, bad cop, where it's not always me just being the bad cop. We've got a really healthy balance where their position coaches hold them accountable, where, Coach Erica, who does a lot on our defense, she's constantly on them. So there's a lot of voices that are, doing the good and the bad, if you will, or the criticism and the praise.
So let's talk about maybe like the outside of the circle, not necessarily like your team, but the admin, the parents, boosters, things like that, and developing relationships with them, because I think that's also important just for the whole program, right? Even at the high school level, right? We have people who want to do things for you, but maybe they just don't know how or how to approach it. So how do you kind of find that balance of building those relationships, but at the same time, um, kind of maybe molding them to how things go in your program?
I think a couple of different ways that we've tried to build some of those inroads. I think first and foremost, you talk about like our team is really invested in our community. So we just try to show up to as many things as we can that works in our schedule, whether it's, other teams, events, games, whatever it may be. Show up on campus to different clubs, organizations. So that again, it's one thing to want people to show up for you, but if you're not doing it for them, it's hard. So I think we've built some inroads on campus so that we've got a lot of people that want to show up for us, whether it's coming to games, coming to, watching on TV, following along with our season. And then when you talk about kind of donors and admin, we are intentional, I would say, about inviting people to kind of see the behind the curtain, whether it's coming to practice, coming to a shoot around, coming in the locker room before a game, whatever it is, of trying to just to allow people into our space. And we know in women's sports, the fan profile is a little bit different, where they want to know our women as people as much as they care about them as basketball players. So allowing them to see them as such. Our women go after every game, they go up into the stands and sign autographs and take pictures and hug babies and kids and run around on the court, and give them a chance to know them as people. And then they'll do anything for them because they know what amazing women they are. And so just allowing our program in general to be really approachable.
So as we move into the last two segments of our show, the first one we call 30-second timeout, and we promise there's no referee in your timeout telling you that the timeout is over. But it's your opportunity to talk about whatever you want. It could be about yourself or your program or something you want our listeners to know about, or any topic you want to discuss. Sometimes people turn the tables on Todd and I and ask us a question. Kind of the floor is yours, whatever you want to talk about.
I want to take the time to brag on our women on our team. I'm so fortunate. I've loved coaching them, but we just have such, I mentioned selfless a bunch, but selfless, joyful people. One of my core values is joy. And I think that you look at, just our leadership group that we had this year, which was Janelle Brown, Lauren Beach, and Isa Nicoletti Leite. I mean, they just exuded so much joy and selflessness this year that I think that I say from the bottom of my heart, they're making the world a better place. And then, the rest of our team follows suit and is exactly the same. But I think, Janelle Brown is a 1 in a million who everything she does is with so much energy and joy that she lights up any room. And I think our leadership and our team has just been amazing. And you can see that in how they play and how they care for each other on the court. But one of our missions is to just spread more joy. And we could not have had a better group. And we've got, a core returning group who has just been amazing. And so if we've done nothing else but spread some joy in the world, I think we're doing something well.
No, that's awesome. I think that gets lost a lot of times, like it's all basketball, 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 and that's all a lot of people see, but we gotta focus on the other things. That's so cool.
Guess what? If there's joy in the gym, they actually want to come to practice.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so this is where we get a little bit unserious, if that's a word. Just quick hitters, just kind of rapid fire questions. Having some fun here. So we're coming to campus, right? We're coming to campus. What's the best place to hang out outside of, or around your campus? If we're coming to campus one day.
All right. Well, I will brag on our dining hall. It's called the Tully. Our staff jokes because we love the Tully. As staff members, we can go for $8. That's all you can eat. Our staff can post up there for quite some time. So if you're on campus, the Tully for sure. But there's some amazing places around town as well. We've got a really cool food scene. I'll give there's a place called Illicit Brewing. Give them a shout out. They did they brand new, just opened up this past year, but they just did a watch party for our NCAA tournament game. It was really cool to kind of see the community come together in there. So there's some really neat places in town as well.
All right. So in your this is very serious, Coach. In your Twitter bio, it says you're a taco enthusiast. So we really need to know your favorite kind of tacos and or place you would get the tacos.
So I love carnitas tacos, but I've gone away from eating some pork and red meat lately, which really hurts my soul. I love shrimp tacos. I will eat a shrimp taco, fish tacos, chicken taco. I mean, there's not much I don't eat. My favorite ever taco was a fried avocado taco. It's actually shout out to Maze in Ypsilanti, Michigan, from when I coached at Eastern Michigan. But in town, Bodega is one of my go-tos. Malibu lunch. There's a lunch special. It's amazing. I'm gonna find the food. Don't worry.
All right. So you have a pretty big Twitter following, but who's kind of one of your favorite Twitter follows? Somebody that maybe something different than basketball, whatever it may be.
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I don't know. I don't think there's one in particular that stands out to me. I love when just like random ones will pop up with quick hitters, baseline out of bounds. There's a bunch of those that I think I just have the algorithm now that I get,
Yeah.
all of those. But I'm also a sucker for cute dog videos. Not gonna lie.
There you go. There you go.
All right, so we got in coaching right now, maybe what's a new trend or something you're looking to research?
Well, I'm excited. Our staff is actually doing a staff retreat. We've done one every year since I've been here. Ours is coming up in early June. And so, we revamped a lot of our offense and defense this past year at our staff retreat. So this year's a lot of fine tuning. Something that I'm trying to take on, kind of building a database, some context on, is kind of transfer trends in our league. And so, you maybe don't talk about trend from a basketball standpoint, but that's something I'm trying to get a better hold on, of what transfers translate in our league and at our level and things like that. But I think that I'm interested. I just bookmarked it. There's someone, I can't remember the name, and apologize for not remembering the name, but someone just did a whole research study on where rebounds come from for threes. Did you see that?
Yeah,
Yes.
I saw that. Yeah.
So that's in my reading list for this weekend,
Yeah.
to go back and kind of get a better idea of that, and if there's ways that we can tweak kind of our rebounding system, if it makes sense too.
Yes, I did see that, and then I followed whoever it was. It was a really interesting read. I think you'll like it.
Awesome.
I know I gotta go. I got a lot of bookmarks. I gotta go back.
What was his name? I feel like we need to give him credit.
I don't remember off the top
I
of my
can
head.
tell you. Hang
I would
on.
have to
Yep.
dig through my bookmarks.
Yeah. Anyway, go on. I wanted to give him credit if I could. Andrew.
Bergia, I think.
Yep.
Oh, there we go. We'll check it out. I got to get into it too. All right. So you graduated as a college valedictorian. What was your hardest class? Like the hardest class you took?
So there's two ways I could take this. So I was a psych major, kind of a concentration in sports psych. I did a double minor in health studies because a lot of master's programs at the time were for sports psychology were housed in like kinesiology. But I also did a minor in Spanish. And so a lot of my Spanish classes ended up being the hardest because I was taking, history classes and art classes taught in Spanish. So a lot of it just, went right over my head. But that, and then ironically, I was never like I want to be a 4.0 or else type of person. I just, always tried to give maximum effort. And but my last class, my spring of my senior year, we had to take like one of your kind of aesthetics courses, I think is what they called it. It was a Spike Lee film course. And I loved the class, but I had a B+ in it because a lot of it was group work and we were gone a lot in the spring, that semester. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to ruin a 4.0 based on a class that I really like. And I should not get a B in a Spike Lee film course. And so I ended up kind of pulling it out in the end, but that one ended up being difficult with, like I said, group work in the middle of a season.
Right. No doubt.
I don't like group work at any time. Anyone likes house classes, so I get it. Coach, we want to thank you again for taking the time to join us today. We hope you had a good time. I know we really enjoyed it. I think Todd and I have about 7,000 more questions we could ask you, but thank you for taking the time to be on with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast in partnership with the IBCA. Please be sure to rate us on whatever platform you are listening and give us a 5-star rating. For more show content and updates, please follow us on Twitter at After the Timeout. As always, thank you for listening. Tune in next time for more content on the court, off the court, and anything in between.